The marriage contract sat on the table between them like a death sentence. Elara Whitmont's hands trembled as she read the terms, her entire future reduced to ink and parchment. Across from her, Duke Adrian Blackthorne didn't even look up. His face could have been carved from granite for all the warmth it showed. "Sign it or don't," he said, voice flat. "Your family's debts won't wait." She wanted to throw the paper in his face. Instead, she picked up the pen. This man, this cold, merciless stranger, was about to become her husband, and everything in his posture told her he'd rather be anywhere else. Stay with us to the end to see how a woman with nothing changes everything. Drop a comment below with your city if you're watching. The Whitmont estate had been dying for years, but Elara hadn't truly understood what that meant until the creditors came. They arrived on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, 3 men in black coats carrying ledgers thick as Bibles. Her father met them in his study, that dim, book-lined room that smelled of pipe smoke and desperation, and Elara listened from the hallway, her ear pressed against the cold oak door. "Lord Whitmont, we've been patient, more than patient." "I understand, Mr. Graves. If you could give me just another month." "We've given you 6 months. The bank has been generous, but generosity has limits." Her father's voice cracked. "My daughter. She's to be married soon. A good match. Surely that counts for something." "To whom?" Silence, long and terrible. "There is no match, is there, my lord?" Elara's stomach dropped. She'd known things were bad. The staff had been reduced to almost nothing. The East Wing closed off entirely, dinners growing simpler by the week, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way she couldn't ignore. When the creditors left, her father stayed in his study. She waited an hour before knocking. "Come in, Elara." He looked older than he had that morning. The afternoon light coming through the window seemed to highlight every line on his face, every gray hair she'd pretended not to notice. "I heard," she said. He didn't ask what she'd heard. "I'm sorry." "How bad is it?" "Bad." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Worse than bad. If we don't settle the debts within 3 months, we lose everything. The house, the land, the title, all of it." Elara sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair she'd sat in as a little girl when he'd teach her to read. "What can we do?" "I've exhausted every option, called in every favor. There's nothing left." "There has to be something." Her father looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her blood run cold. "There is one possibility," he said slowly, "but I won't ask it of you. Tell me." "No." "Father, tell me." He stood, walked to the window, kept his back to her. "Duke Adrian Blackthorne approached me last week." The name alone made her stiffen. Everyone knew of the Duke. He controlled half the northern territories, owned mines and factories and shipping companies that stretched across 3 provinces. He was ruthlessly efficient, famously cold, and according to every rumor Elara had ever heard, utterly incapable of human warmth. What did he want? A wife. The words hit her like a slap. What? He needs a marriage, something to legitimize his position in society, to quiet the whispers about his reputation. He's willing to pay handsomely for the right arrangement. You mean he's willing to buy someone? Elara, that's what you're saying, isn't it? He wants to purchase a bride like he'd purchase a horse or a piece of property. Her father turned to face her. I told him no. I told him you deserved better than a transaction, but he said the offer would stand for 2 weeks, and then he gestured helplessly at the room around them. I won't force you. I'd rather lose everything than see you trapped in a loveless marriage. Elara's mind raced. A loveless marriage, as if love had ever been guaranteed to her anyway. She was 23, past the age most women married, with no prospects and no dowry. The idea that she'd find some romantic fairy tale had always been fantasy. But this was something else entirely. What are his terms? Elara, no. What are his terms? Her father sighed, defeated. He'll clear all our debts immediately upon marriage. He'll provide a generous annual allowance for the household and ensure the estate is maintained. In return, you would live at Blackthorne Manor as his duchess, manage his household, and appear at his side for necessary social functions. And there had to be more. And produce an heir within 3 years. There it was, the real transaction. He didn't want a wife, he wanted a broodmare with good bloodlines. He made it clear, her father continued, voice heavy, that he expects nothing beyond the arrangement, no affection, no intimacy beyond what's necessary. You would have your own chambers, your own life. He simply needs the appearance of a proper marriage. Elara stood, her legs feeling unsteady. I need to think. Of course, take all the time. I'll do it. Her father blinked. What? I'll marry him. Elara, you haven't thought this through. Yes, I have. She surprised herself with how steady her voice sounded. You said we have no options. This is an option. I won't watch our family lose everything because I was too proud to make a practical choice. This isn't practical. It's necessary. She met his eyes. Write to him. Tell him I accept. Look, the meeting was arranged for the following week at Blackthorne Manor. Elara had never been this far north. The landscape grew harsher as their carriage traveled, trees giving way to rocky hills, the air taking on a bite that promised early winter. Blackthorne Manor sat at the edge of the northern territories like a fortress, all dark stone and sharp angles, surrounded by forests that looked like they'd swallow you whole if you ventured too far. The butler who greeted them, a thin man with silver hair and a face like a closed door, introduced himself as Morrison. His Grace will see you in the blue drawing room, he said, his tone suggesting this was both an honor and a warning. They were led through hallways that felt more like corridors in a prison than a home. Everything was immaculate, floors polished to mirrors, surfaces gleaming, but there was no warmth to it. No flowers, no personal touches, nothing that suggested actual people lived here. The blue drawing room was aptly named. Every surface was some shade of blue, from the pale walls to the navy curtains to the cobalt vases on the mantel. It was beautiful in the way a winter morning was beautiful, lovely and utterly cold. Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood by the window. Elara's first thought was that the rumors hadn't done him justice. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his perfectly tailored coat. Dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that would have been handsome if it ever showed any expression at all. He looked to be in his early 30s, but there was something ancient in the way he carried himself, like he'd lived several lifetimes already and found them all disappointing. He turned when they entered, his gaze sweeping over Elara with all the warmth of a property assessor. Lord Whitmont, Miss Whitmont. His voice was deep, controlled, absolutely empty of inflection. Your Grace. Her father bowed. Elara curtsied, hating every second of it. I trust your journey was acceptable? Yes, thank you. Good. He gestured to the chairs. Please, sit. They sat. The Duke remained standing, which Elara suspected was intentional, a power play, keeping them literally beneath him. I assume your father explained the arrangement, he said, looking directly at Elara now. He did. And you understand what I'm offering? Financial security in exchange for a wife in name only. Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or approval. Precisely. I have no interest in romance or companionship. I need a duchess who can manage my household and fulfill social obligations without requiring emotional engagement. The bluntness should have been insulting. Instead, Elara found it almost refreshing. At least he wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was. And what do you expect from me specifically? She asked. Her father made a small sound of protest, probably at her directness, but the Duke's attention sharpened. You will oversee the household staff, plan and host necessary social events, and manage the day-to-day operations of the estate. You will accompany me to important functions and present a united front to society. Beyond that, your time is your own. And the heir you require? He didn't even blink. When the time comes, we will discuss it. But understand, I have no interest in forcing anything. This is a business arrangement, not a love match. I'm well aware. Elara leaned forward slightly. But if this is truly a business arrangement, then I have terms of my own. Her father actually gasped. The Duke's eyebrows rose a fraction. Terms? Yes. If I'm to be your duchess, I want control over the household budget. Complete control, not just what you decide to allocate. I want authority over all staff decisions, hiring, firing, wages. And I want access to the estate records so I can understand what I'm managing. The silence that followed was deafening. You're negotiating, the Duke said finally. You're buying a service. I'm ensuring I can provide it properly. For the first time, his expression shifted into something that might have been amusement or annoyance. With him, it was hard to tell. Most women would simply agree to the terms offered. I'm not most women. Clearly. He studied her for a long moment. Very well. You'll have your control over household matters, but understand, the estate itself, the business, the financial decisions beyond domestic concerns, those remain mine. Agreed. Then we have a deal. He moved to the table, picked up a paper Elara hadn't noticed before. The contract. Read it thoroughly. If you have questions, ask them now. She read every word. The terms were exactly as described, cold, transactional, clear. Her father had been paid off. The wedding would take place in 3 weeks. She would move to Blackthorne Manor immediately after. The marriage contract sat on the table between them like a death sentence. Her hands trembled as she reached for the pen. Sign it or don't, the Duke said, his voice flat. Your family's debts won't wait. She wanted to throw the paper in his face, wanted to tell him exactly what she thought of men who treated women like commodities, wanted to run back to the carriage and never look at this cold, miserable place again. Instead, she signed her name. The wedding was small, immediate family only, which in Elara's case meant her father and younger brother Thomas, and in Adrian's case meant no one at all. No family? She'd asked when the arrangements were being made. No family, he'd confirmed, offering no explanation. The ceremony took place in the manor's chapel, a beautiful space that felt more like a mausoleum than a place of worship. The priest rushed through the vows like he was afraid lingering too long might freeze him solid. Adrian's responses were mechanical. Elara's were barely audible. When the priest said, "You may kiss your bride," Adrian leaned in and pressed his lips to hers for exactly 2 seconds, enough to satisfy tradition, not a moment more. Then it was done. She was a duchess. She was married to a stranger. She was trapped. The wedding breakfast was even worse than the ceremony. They sat at opposite ends of a table that could have seated 20, eating in near silence while her father and Thomas made awkward attempts at conversation that died like sparks in snow. "The estate looks very well maintained, Your Grace," her father tried. "It is. The grounds must be extensive." "They are." Thomas, 17 and still naive enough to believe in things like hope, jumped in. "Do you hunt, Your Grace? The forests look incredible." "I don't." "Oh, do you ride?" "When necessary." After 30 minutes of this torture, her father and brother made their excuses to leave. Elara walked them out to their carriage, desperate for a few more minutes of familiar faces. "Elara," her father pulled her aside, voice low. "It's not too late. If you want to leave, and go where? Back to a house we don't own anymore?" He flinched. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Don't be. I made this choice." She hugged him, probably holding on longer than she should have. "I'll be fine." Thomas hugged her next, and she could feel him shaking. "He's awful," he whispered. "He's honest. That's better than most. Write to us." "I will. Now go before I change my mind about being brave." She watched their carriage disappear down the tree-lined drive, and then she was alone. Truly alone, in a way she'd never been before. Morrison appeared at her elbow, like a ghost. "Your Grace, the Duke has returned to his study. He asked me to show you to your chambers." Her chambers. Not their chambers. The separation had begun already. The Duchess's suite was in the West Wing, as far from the Duke's rooms as possible while still being in the same building. It was beautiful, she had to admit. All done in soft creams and golds, with windows that overlooked the gardens and a sitting room that could have fit her entire bedroom from home. "His Grace has arranged for a lady's maid," Morrison said. "She'll arrive tomorrow. If you need anything before then, ring the bell." "Thank you." He bowed and left, and Elara stood in the center of her new prison, trying to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. She lasted about an hour before she decided sitting in her room feeling sorry for herself was pathetic. If she was going to be Duchess of this frozen hellscape, She might as well start acting like it. The manor was enormous. 3 floors, 2 wings, more rooms than anyone could possibly need. She wandered through them, noting the expensive but impersonal decoration, the way every surface gleamed but nothing felt lived in. It was like walking through a museum of someone's life rather than an actual home. She found the library on the 2nd floor and spent a few minutes there, running her fingers along spines of books that looked like they'd never been opened. She found a music room with a piano covered in dust. She found a conservatory with windows on 3 sides and not a single plant. What she didn't find was any sign of life. No family portraits, no personal items, no indication that anyone actually lived here beyond existing. She was heading back toward her wing when she heard voices, sharp, angry voices coming from behind a closed door. "Can't keep ignoring it, Your Grace." "I'm not ignoring anything." That was Adrian's voice, harder than she'd heard it before. "The workers are talking. They want to know, but they'll know when I decide to tell them. Until then, they work and they're paid. That's the arrangement." "Sir, with respect, that's not enough, not anymore." Elara knew she should keep walking. This was none of her business. She'd been here less than a day. But something in the steward's voice, a desperation, a frustration, made her pause. "This conversation is over," Adrian said. "But over. Get out." The door flew open and a middle-aged man in work clothes stormed out, nearly running into Elara. "Oh, Your Grace, I..." He looked mortified. "I apologize. I didn't mean..." "It's fine," she said quickly. "You're the estate steward?" "Yes, Your Grace. Marcus Webb." From inside the room, Adrian's voice. "Webb! Leave! Now!" Webb shot her one more apologetic look and hurried away. Elara, feeling bold or stupid or some combination of both, stepped into the doorway. Adrian sat behind a massive desk covered in papers and ledgers, his expression thunderous. When he saw her, his scowl deepened. "Was there something you needed?" "I heard arguing." "Estate business. Nothing that concerns you." "I'm the Duchess now. Everything about this estate concerns me." He stared at her like she'd just suggested they burn the manor down. "Your concerns are the household. The running of the estate, the real estate, the business, is mine." "Those were the terms," she agreed. "But if there's trouble, there's no trouble." "Really? Because your steward seemed fairly troubled just now." "Webb worries too much." "About what?" "Nothing." She crossed her arms. "You're a terrible liar." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Something's wrong, and you're shutting people out instead of dealing with it." He stood, and the movement was so sudden, so controlled, that for a second she thought he might actually be angry. Really angry, not just cold. "You've been here 4 hours," he said, each word precisely placed. "You know nothing about this estate or how I run it. I suggest you focus on your own responsibilities and leave mine to me." "Or what?" "You'll send me back?" "We're married now, Your Grace. I'm here whether you like it or not." They stared at each other across the desk, and Elara felt something shift in the air, not warmth exactly, but a crack in the ice. A recognition that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be as simple as he'd planned. "You should rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow will be busy. You have a household to learn." "I thought I'd start by meeting the staff." "Morrison will arrange it." "Good." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing." "What?" "That conservatory on the 3rd floor, it's wasted space. I'm going to turn it into a proper greenhouse. The conservatory is fine as it is." "It's empty and unused. That's not fine. That's a waste." You gave me control over household matters. Gardens are household matters. Unless you'd like to renegotiate our contract already." The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. "Do what you want," he said finally, turning back to his papers. "Just stay out of my way." "That's the plan." She left before he could say anything else, her heart pounding harder than it should have been. It was a small victory, a greenhouse of all things, but it felt important. He'd wanted a wife who would stay silent and obedient and out of sight. He'd married the wrong woman. The next few weeks established a pattern. Adrian disappeared into his study or rode out to inspect various parts of his holdings, sometimes gone for days at a time. Elara threw herself into the household, learning names and faces, understanding the rhythms of the manor. What she found surprised her. The staff was competent but wary, going through motions with professional efficiency, but no real investment. The manor ran like clockwork, but it was a cold clockwork. Everything functioning, nothing thriving. "How long have you been here?" she asked Mrs. Hendricks, the head housekeeper, during one of their morning meetings. 15 years, Your Grace." "And the Duke? What's he like to work for?" Mrs. Hendricks' face became carefully neutral. "His Grace is exacting. He expects perfection and accepts nothing less." "But?" "But what, Your Grace?" There's a but in your voice. The older woman hesitated, then said quietly, "He's not cruel. He pays well, better than most. But he doesn't see us as people. We're just parts of the machine that keeps this place running." Elara nodded slowly. That tracked with everything she'd observed. Adrian didn't mistreat his staff. He simply didn't engage with them as human beings at all. "Well," she said, "I'd like to change that. Starting with proper tea breaks for the household staff, real breaks, not just when they can snatch a moment. And I want to hear if anyone has concerns or suggestions about how things are run." Mrs. Hendricks looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. "Your Grace, His Grace has very specific ideas about. His Grace gave me control over household management. I'm managing." News of the changes spread quickly. Elara could see it in the way staff started making eye contact when she passed, in the way conversations didn't immediately die when she entered a room. Small things, but they mattered. Adrian noticed too. "You've changed the staff schedules," he said one evening when they happened to cross paths in the hallway. "I streamlined them. People work better when they're not exhausted. They were fine before. They were functioning before. Now they're fine." He studied her with those unreadable dark eyes. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone quieter." "Sorry to disappoint." "I didn't say I was disappointed." He turned to continue to his study, then paused. "The greenhouse. You've made progress?" She'd been working on it for 3 weeks now, clearing out years of neglect, planning what to plant. "Some." "Good." It was the closest thing to approval she'd gotten from him, and she hated how much that small word pleased her. But the moment of near warmth was shattered the next morning when she went to the library and found an entire section sealed off behind locked doors. "What's this?" she asked Morrison when he appeared. "The East Collection, Your Grace. It's not in use." "Then why is it locked?" "His Grace's orders." "What's in there?" Morrison's face became a mask. "I couldn't say, Your Grace." "Couldn't or won't. Both, if I'm honest." She tried the handle again, more to be difficult than anything else, solid as stone. "Fine. Where's the Duke?" "In his study." Of course he was. She didn't bother knocking. Adrian looked up from his papers, expression immediately hardening when he saw her. "What's in the East Library?" she demanded. "Nothing that concerns you." "It's a library in the house I manage. It concerns me." "No," he said, voice dropping to something that might have been dangerous if she'd been smart enough to care. "It doesn't. I'm not asking to read your private correspondence. I just want to know why an entire room is locked away." "Because I said so." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." She wanted to push. Every instinct told her there was something important here, something he was hiding. But she could also see in the set of his jaw, the ice in his eyes, that pushing right now would get her nowhere. "Fine," she said. "Keep your secrets. But understand, I'm not going to stop asking questions just because you don't like them." Noted. She left, frustrated and curious in equal measure. There were secrets in this house, buried deep in its stones and colder still than the winter wind outside. And she was starting to realize that her cold, distant husband wasn't just emotionally closed off. He was actively hiding something he was afraid of. The locked library haunted her thoughts for days, but Elara forced herself to focus on what she could control. The greenhouse was taking shape. She'd hired 2 local men to repair the broken glass panels and reinforce the structure. The conservatory that had been gathering dust was slowly transforming into something living. She was there one cold morning, directing where the new planting bed should go, when she heard voices outside. Angry voices. Through the glass, she could see a small group of men, workers from the estate by their clothes, gathered near the side entrance. Marcus Webb stood with them, gesturing emphatically, while one of the others shook his head. Elara set down the seed catalog she'd been reviewing and went to investigate. "Can't keep working like this," one of the men was saying as she approached. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor labor. "My wife's sick. The baby's due in 2 months. I asked for an advance on my wages and got told to make do." "I tried to speak to His Grace," Webb said, frustration evident in every word. "He won't budge." "Then what are we supposed to do?" "Your Grace." Webb had spotted her. The other men went silent immediately, a few of them actually stepping back like she might bite. "I didn't mean to intrude," Elara said, "but I couldn't help overhearing. Your wife is ill?" The young man, she thought his name might be Thomas, or maybe James, nodded warily. "Yes, Your Grace, nothing serious, the doctor says, but she needs medicine we can't afford." "And you asked the Duke for help?" "I asked the steward for an advance on my wages, to be repaid over the next 6 months." "That seems reasonable." Webb made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "His Grace doesn't do advances, says it encourages poor money management." Elara felt anger spark in her chest. "That's ridiculous." The workers stared at her like she'd just sprouted wings. Even Webb looked shocked. "Your Grace," he said carefully, "perhaps we shouldn't—" "How much do you need?" she asked the young worker directly. £20 would cover it, Your Grace, but I can earn it back, I swear." "Consider it done. Come to my sitting room this afternoon and I'll have it for you." The silence that followed was absolute. "Your Grace," Webb finally said, "I'm not sure His Grace would approve. His Grace gave me control over household management. The health and welfare of estate workers falls under that purview." She met each man's eyes in turn. "If any of you have similar difficulties, come to me directly. We'll find solutions." She walked away before they could respond, before she could second-guess herself. £20 wasn't nothing, but it wasn't catastrophic either. She had access to the household accounts, and there was discretionary money set aside for unexpected expenses. This qualified. What she wasn't prepared for was Adrian finding out within 3 hours. She was in the greenhouse, actually getting her hands dirty for the first time in weeks when he appeared in the doorway. She knew immediately from his posture that he was furious. "My study. Now." "I'm in the middle of now." She stood, brushed dirt from her skirt, and followed him through the manor. Staff scattered like leaves before a storm. Whatever was about to happen, they wanted no part of it. His study door closed behind them with a sound like a judge's gavel. "You gave James Fletcher £20. "I did." "Without consulting me." "I didn't realize I needed your permission to use household discretionary funds for household matters. Those funds are not for handing out charity to workers who can't manage their own affairs." Elara felt her temper rise to meet his. His wife is sick. He needed medicine. That's not charity, that's basic human decency. It's poor precedent. If one worker gets an advance, they'll all expect the same treatment. Good. Maybe they should expect it. Maybe instead of hoarding money like some kind of dragon, you could invest in the people who actually keep this place running. His eyes went cold enough to frost glass. "You don't understand how estates work. I understand that you'd rather let a pregnant woman suffer than show an ounce of compassion. Compassion makes you weak. It makes people take advantage. Who hurt you?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Who took advantage of your compassion so badly that you turned into this?" For just a second, a fraction of a second, something cracked in his expression. Pain, raw and old and quickly buried. "That," he said quietly, dangerously, "is none of your concern. Everything about you is my concern now. We're married, remember? Or is that just another transaction you'd rather forget about?" "You're crossing a line." "What line? The one where I'm supposed to be silent and decorative and grateful? Sorry, Your Grace, but you married the wrong woman for that role." They stood on opposite sides of his desk, close enough to touch but separated by miles of ice and anger and things neither of them knew how to say. "The money," he said finally, "will be deducted from your personal allowance." "Fine. And you will not, under any circumstances, Make such decisions without consulting me again. Or what? You'll lock me in my chambers? Send me back to my father? She leaned forward, hands flat on his desk. I'm here whether you like it or not. I'm the Duchess of Blackthorne, and I'm going to do what I think is right, regardless of your approval. Then we're going to have a very difficult marriage. We were always going to have a difficult marriage. At least now we're being honest about it. She left before he could respond, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The confrontation should have ended things, but instead it seemed to crack something open. Not warmth, nothing so generous as that, but a kind of wary acknowledgement. They were locked in this together, and neither of them knew how to back down. Word of what she'd done spread through the estate like wildfire. Within a week, 3 more workers had come to her with problems. Nothing huge, just the kinds of small crises that crushed people when they had no safety net. A roof that needed repair before winter. A daughter who needed school books. A mother who needed to see a specialist in the city. Elara helped them all. Adrian said nothing, but she could feel his disapproval like a physical weight every time they crossed paths. The staff began to change. They smiled when they saw her. They lingered in conversations instead of rushing away. They started bringing her problems not just with the household, but with the estate itself. The South Tenant cottages need new roofs, Mrs. Hendricks mentioned one morning. They've needed them for 3 years, but His Grace keeps saying it's not in the budget. Show me the budget. Mrs. Hendricks looked uncomfortable. Your Grace, I'm not sure. Show me. The household accounts were impeccable, as expected. Adrian ran his finances like he ran everything else, with precision and no tolerance for waste. But as Elara traced through the numbers, something became clear. There was money available. Plenty of it. He simply wasn't spending it on anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Why? She asked Webb when she cornered him in the estate office. Why does he refuse to invest in repairs and improvements when he can clearly afford it? Webb shifted uncomfortably. It's not my place to say, Your Grace. Webb, please. I'm trying to understand him. The steward sighed, looking older than his years. His Grace was betrayed. Before I came here, about 18 years ago now, his father was swindled by his business partner, a man he trusted completely. They lost everything. His mother died from the stress of it. His father died a year later, leaving His Grace with nothing but debts and a title. How did he rebuild? The hard way. Worked himself half to death, trusted no one, spent nothing unless absolutely necessary. He clawed back every penny, bought back every property that had been sold, restored the family name through sheer stubbornness. Webb met her eyes. But the cost was everything else. He learned that trusting people gets you destroyed, that spending money on comfort or kindness was just inviting disaster. Elara felt something shift in her chest. Not sympathy exactly. Adrian was still insufferably cold, but understanding. He wasn't cruel by nature. He was terrified. He'd built walls so high and thick that nothing could get through, not even basic human connection. The tenant cottages, she said, how much would repairs cost? For all 8? Maybe £300? And His Grace has refused? Every year for 3 years running. Elara nodded slowly. Thank you, Webb. She knew what she had to do. She also knew Adrian was going to hate it. She waited until dinner, one of the rare times they were forced into the same room together. They ate at opposite ends of that ridiculous table, courses served in near silence, the clink of silverware the only conversation. I want to repair the South Tenant cottages, she said, her voice carrying down the length of polished wood. Adrian didn't look up from his plate. No. I wasn't asking permission. I'm informing you. Now he looked up. Those repairs are estate business, not household business. Those are people living in houses with leaking roofs and crumbling walls. That's absolutely household business. The budget has plenty of room. I've seen the accounts. His fork hit his plate with a sharp sound. You've been going through my financial records? The household financial records, which I have every right to review. Those cottages are fine. They're not fine. They're barely standing. And you're letting them rot because you're too... She stopped herself, barely. Too what? Too afraid, she said, more gently than she'd intended. Too afraid that spending money means losing control. You don't know what you're talking about. Webb told me. About your father. About what happened. Adrian stood so fast his chair scraped across the floor. Webb had no right. He was trying to help me understand you. There's nothing to understand. Those cottages will be repaired when I decide they need to be repaired. And in the meantime, families suffer. They have roofs over their heads. They're employed. They're better off than most. Better off than most isn't the same as well cared for. He stared at her down the length of that absurd table, and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger, but something deeper. Hurt maybe, or fear, or some combination she didn't have words for. You've been here 2 months, he said, each word carefully measured. You know nothing about running an estate, about the realities of maintaining holdings this size. You think kindness solves everything, but it doesn't. It gets you used. It gets you betrayed. Not everyone is your father's partner. Everyone is until they prove otherwise. Then let them prove otherwise. Let people show you they're worth trusting instead of assuming they'll fail. I've made my decision. The cottages will wait. Then I'll pay for them myself. The silence was sharp enough to cut. What? I have my own money. Not much, but enough. I'll use that. You will not. Watch me. They glared at each other, the space between them electric with anger and something else, something neither of them wanted to name. If you do this, Adrian said quietly, you undermine everything I've built here. You make me look weak. Or I make you look human. I can't afford to be human. The words hung in the air, sad and true and unbearable. Elara stood, her dinner barely touched. Then I feel sorry for you. She left him there, alone at his end of the table, and didn't look back. She used her own funds to start the repairs. It wasn't enough to complete all 8 cottages, but it was enough for 3. The workers she hired started the next week, and the tenant families were so grateful it made her chest ache. Adrian didn't speak to her for 4 days. On the 5th day, she found an envelope slipped under her sitting room door. Inside was a bank draft for £200 and a note in sharp, precise handwriting. For the remaining cottages. No apology, no explanation, just money and his initial. She sat with that note for a long time, trying to decipher what it meant. Was it surrender, compromise, or just his way of maintaining control while appearing to give in? She decided it didn't matter. The cottages would be repaired. That was what counted. But things shifted after that. Subtle things. Adrian started joining her for breakfast sometimes, still silent but present. He asked about the greenhouse once. When she mentioned wanting to start a small school for the tenant children, he didn't immediately refuse. He just said he'd think about it. They were learning each other. Not quickly, not easily, but gradually. Like 2 wild animals circling, trying to decide if the other was a threat. The staff noticed. Mrs. Hendricks actually smiled when she saw them in the same room without active hostility. Webb looked less like he was waiting for someone to die. Elara started to think maybe, just maybe, this could work. Not as the marriage she'd once dreamed of, but as something else. A partnership built on mutual respect, if not affection. Then winter came in earnest, and with it, trouble. The first sign was smoke. Elara woke in the middle of the night to the smell of it, acrid and wrong. She threw on a robe and ran into the hallway where chaos had already erupted. Staff were running, shouting, and through the nearest window she could see orange light flickering against the darkness. Fire! Itchetsan. Someone was yelling, "The East Wing's on fire!" The East Wing, where the locked library was, where Adrian kept his secrets. She ran toward the flames without thinking, joining the bucket brigade that had already formed. The heat was intense, the smoke choking, but she grabbed a bucket and passed it down the line. "Where's the Duke?" she shouted over the roar. "Inside!" Webb appeared beside her, face soot-stained. "He went in after the fire started." "What? Why?" "I don't know, but—" A section of roof collapsed with a sound like thunder. Sparks exploded into the night sky. "Adrian!" Elara screamed his name without thinking, without the title, just his name. "Adrian!" No response. She dropped her bucket and ran toward the entrance. Your Grace, no! Webb grabbed her arm. It's too dangerous. He's in there. The men will get him. When? After he's dead? She tore free and ran into the smoke. The heat hit her like a fist. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, couldn't breathe without coughing, but she pushed forward. The East Wing. The library. That's where he'd be, protecting whatever secrets he kept locked away. Adrian! She was choking on smoke now, eyes streaming. Adrian, where are you? A crash somewhere to her left. Then a cough. Human, close. She stumbled toward the sound and nearly fell over him. He was on the floor, surrounded by books and papers, trying to drag something, a trunk, heavy and old. You idiot! She gasped, grabbing his arm. Leave it. No. His voice was raw. I can't. It's not worth your life. You don't understand. Part of the ceiling gave way. Elara threw herself over Adrian, felt heat and debris rain down on her back. When she looked up, the way they'd come in was blocked. There's another exit, Adrian croaked. Through the servants' passage, but we have to leave this. Then leave it. Elara. She'd never heard him say her name before, never heard that particular note in his voice. Desperation mixed with something that might have been fear. We leave now, or we die here, she said flatly. Choose. For a second she thought he might actually choose the trunk, choose his secrets over his life, over her life. Then he grabbed her hand, actually grabbed it, skin to skin, his palm rough and warm, and pulled her toward a door she hadn't noticed. They ran through smoke and heat, his hand locked on hers, until they burst out into the cold night air and collapsed onto frozen grass. Behind them, the East Wing roared with flame. Staff swarmed them immediately. Someone wrapped a blanket around Elara's shoulders. Someone else was checking Adrian for injuries. The noise was overwhelming, people shouting, the fire still crackling and spitting, the distant sound of more help arriving. But all Elara could focus on was Adrian's hand, still gripping hers like he'd forgotten to let go. You came in after me, he said, staring at her like she was some kind of impossible creature. You went in first, you absolute fool. I had to. He stopped, coughed, started again. There were things in there that couldn't be lost. Things more important than your life? Things more dangerous than my life. Before she could ask what that meant, Webb was there with a doctor, and they were being separated, checked for injuries, wrapped in more blankets, pulled in different directions. But as they were led away, Adrian looked back at her once. And for the first time since she'd known him, his expression was completely, devastatingly unguarded. He was afraid. Not of the fire, not of death, of whatever secrets had just gone up in flames. The doctor declared them both lucky. Minor burns, smoke inhalation, nothing life-threatening. Elara didn't feel lucky. She felt like she'd been hit by a carriage and dragged through gravel. They sat in Adrian's study, the only major room untouched by the fire, while the household scrambled to contain the damage and account for losses. Dawn was breaking outside, gray and cold, painting everything in shades of ash. Adrian hadn't spoken since the doctor left. He sat behind his desk, still in his smoke-stained clothes, staring at nothing. What was in that trunk? Elara finally asked. Papers. What kind of papers? Old ones. Adrian. She was too tired for games. You nearly died for old papers. What were they? He looked at her then, and the exhaustion in his face was so profound it actually hurt to see. Proof. Of what? That my father wasn't the fool everyone thought he was. The words hung in the smoky air between them. Outside, voices shouted instructions as workers assessed the damage. Inside, the silence was absolute. Tell me, she said. Why? So you can pity me more than you already do? I don't pity you. I'm trying to understand you. He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. There's nothing to understand. My father trusted the wrong person. He was betrayed. He lost everything. End of story. Except it's not, is it? Because you've spent 18 years rebuilding this place like a fortress, refusing to trust anyone, refusing to spend a penny more than necessary. That's not just grief, that's fear. You think I don't know that? His voice rose. You think I don't know I'm... He stopped, jaw clenched. I know what I am. I know what I've become. But I also know that it kept me alive. It kept this estate alive. At what cost? Whatever cost was necessary. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to shake him until some sense fell into that stubborn, damaged head. But she could also see the cracks forming in his armor, and something told her that pushing now would only make him retreat further. "The fire," she said instead. "How did it start?" "I don't know." "You must have some idea." "The East Wing has been sealed for years. No one goes in there. No candles, no lamps, nothing that could cause a fire." "Then it was set deliberately." He met her eyes, and she saw confirmation there. "Who would want to burn down part of your house?" she asked, though dread was already forming in her stomach. Someone who knew what was hidden there. Before she could respond, Morrison appeared in the doorway, his usually impeccable composure shattered. "Your Grace, you need to see this." They followed him to what remained of the East Wing. The fire was out, but the damage was catastrophic. Walls had collapsed, floors had given way, and the smell of wet ash was overwhelming. Webb stood in the ruins, holding something in his soot-stained hands. "We found this in the debris," he said, offering it to Adrian. "Near where the fire started." It was a lantern, broken, but unmistakably intentional. The kind you'd use to set a fire, not prevent one. "Someone did this on purpose," Elara said. "Not just someone." Adrian's voice was eerily calm. "Someone who knew exactly where to strike." "Who?" "I can think of several possibilities." He turned to Webb. "Send word to the magistrate. I want an investigation started immediately, and double the watch on the estate. No one comes or goes without my knowledge." "Yes, Your Grace." As Webb hurried away, Elara grabbed Adrian's arm. "What aren't you telling me?" "Everything." He pulled free, not roughly but firmly. "Go rest. You've done enough. Don't shut me out. Not now. I'm protecting you." "From what?" "From people who burn buildings to hide evidence of worse crimes." The words chilled her more than the winter air. "Adrian, please." The word came out ragged. "Just please, go." She wanted to refuse, wanted to demand answers, but she could see he was barely holding himself together, and pushing him further would break something neither of them could fix. So she went. But she didn't rest. Instead, she went to the servants' quarters and found Mrs. Hendricks coordinating the chaos with military precision. "Your Grace, you should be in bed. I need to know who had access to the East Wing." Mrs. Hendricks blinked. "No one. It's been locked for years." "Someone got in. Someone set that fire." The housekeeper's face went pale. "That's not possible. His Grace has the only key." "Are you certain?" Yes, I think so. Unless..." She hesitated. "Unless what?" "Unless someone made a copy, but that would require the original key, and His Grace keeps it on him at all times." Elara's mind raced. "Who else knows what's in that wing?" "I don't, Your Grace. His Grace never speaks of it, but..." Another hesitation. "Mrs. Hendricks, please. If there's something relevant..." "There was a visitor 3 days ago. A man from the city. He asked to see His Grace, said it was urgent business." "Did he give a name?" "Cornelius Ashford." Elara had never heard the name, but the way Mrs. Hendricks said it, careful, worried, suggested it meant something. "Who is he?" "I don't know exactly, but I heard His Grace shouting after the meeting. He never shouts." "What did he say?" "I couldn't make out words, just anger, real anger, not the cold kind he usually shows." Elara nodded slowly. "Thank you. And Mrs. Hendricks? Don't mention this conversation to anyone, not even His Grace." The housekeeper looked uncomfortable. "Your Grace, I'm not sure..." "Trust me. Please." After a moment, Mrs. Hendricks nodded. Elara went next to the library, the main one, not the burned remains, and started searching for anything about Cornelius Ashford. It took her 2 hours of digging through old papers and estate records before she found it. A letter, dated 3 months before she'd married Adrian. The handwriting was different from Adrian's. Sloppier, aggressive. "Blackthorne, you cannot run from this forever. What was stolen must be returned. I have proof of your father's crimes. And if you don't cooperate, I'll make sure every magistrate in the region knows exactly what kind of family you come from. You have until the end of the year. C. Ashford. Her hands shook as she read it again. Crimes, proof, threats. What had Adrian's father done? And what did this Ashford want? She was so absorbed in the letter she didn't hear footsteps until Adrian spoke from the doorway. You should have stayed in bed. She spun around, heart hammering. He looked at the letter in her hands, and his expression went blank. Where did you find that? In your correspondence files. Who is Cornelius Ashford? Someone from a long time ago. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Adrian, someone just burned down part of your house. Someone who might be connected to this man. You can't keep shutting me out. I can do whatever I need to keep you safe. I don't need to be kept safe. I need to be trusted. The words echoed in the ruined quiet of the library. Adrian stared at her, something working in his expression. Anger, fear, maybe even longing. You want the truth? He said finally. Fine. My father wasn't betrayed by a business partner. He was the betrayer. Elara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What? He embezzled money. A lot of it. From investors, from partners, from anyone stupid enough to trust him. He built this estate on theft and lies, and when it all came crashing down, he killed himself rather than face the consequences. The confession hit her like a physical blow. That's not... Webb said... Webb knows the story I wanted him to know. The story everyone knows. But the truth is, my father was a criminal, and I've spent 18 years trying to make up for what he did. How? By paying back every penny, every investor, every partner, everyone he stole from. It took everything I had, everything I earned, everything I built. But I did it, all except one. Ashford. His father. Cornelius Ashford. Senior invested his entire fortune with my father. When it disappeared, it destroyed him. He drank himself to death within a year. His son, Cornelius Jr., has been hunting me ever since, demanding not just the money, but interest, penalties, reparations for his father's death. How much does he want? Everything. The estate, the businesses, all of it. He says it's justice. I say it's revenge. Elara sank into the nearest chair, trying to process everything. The fire. He said it? I don't know for certain, but the timing is suspicious. He visited 3 days ago, demanded I sign over half my holdings by the end of the month. I refused. And now this. What was in the East Wing? What was he trying to destroy? Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, proof that my father didn't act alone. That there was a partner, someone who helped him embezzle the money and who disappeared with a significant portion of it. Someone who's still alive. Who? I don't know. My father never named them, but if I could find them, if I could prove they exist, it might be enough to reduce what I owe Ashford. Might even clear my father's name, at least partially. And now that proof is gone. Most of it. I managed to save some papers, the ones in the trunk, but the key documents, the ones that named names and detailed transactions, those are Ash. Elara stood, her mind racing. Then we need to find this partner another way. There is no other way. Without those documents, there's always another way. We just have to think. Elara. He said her name like a prayer and a curse at once. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. I'm your wife, remember? We're in this together, whether you like it or not. You could get hurt. If Ashford is willing to commit arson, then we need to move faster than he does. They stared at each other across the library, and Elara saw the moment he made his decision. Saw him choose, maybe for the first time in 18 years, to trust someone. There's one person who might know, he said slowly. My father's old solicitor. He handled all the legal paperwork for the embezzlement case. If anyone has copies of documents, it would be him. Where is he? Bristol. 3 days' travel by carriage. Then we leave today. Elara, we're wasting time. If Ashford is escalating, we need to move now. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he nodded. I'll arrange the carriage. They left within 4 hours, taking only Morrison and 2 guards. The journey was brutal. Winter roads half frozen, the carriage jolting over every rut and stone. They barely spoke, both lost in their own thoughts. On the second night staying at a coaching inn halfway to Bristol, Elara woke to find Adrian standing at the window of their shared room. Another first. Sharing space. Staring out at the darkness. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Never could. Not well, anyway." She got up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and joined him. Outside, snow was starting to fall. "Tell me about your mother," she said. "Why?" "Because you never mention her. Your father, yes, but never her." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, "She was kind, too kind for someone like my father. When the scandal broke, when everyone turned on us, she tried to hold things together, tried to convince me it would be all right. But it wasn't. No, she died of a fever the winter after he killed himself. But I think—" He stopped, swallowed. "I think it was really heartbreak. She loved him. Even after everything, she loved him. And it destroyed her. So you decided never to love anyone. I decided never to be weak enough to be destroyed." Elara felt tears prick her eyes. "Love isn't weakness. It is when it blinds you to reality. Or maybe reality is easier to face when you're not facing it alone." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, like he was seeing her as a person for the first time instead of just an inconvenient wife. "You shouldn't have married me," he said. "Probably not. You could have said no. So could you. I know what you needed. A transaction, a clean arrangement with no messy emotions." She stepped closer. "But that's not what you got, is it?" "No." His voice was rough. "It's not." They stood there in the darkness, close enough to touch, but not touching, while snow fell outside and the rest of the world slept. "I'm afraid," he said suddenly. "All the time. Every decision, every choice, I'm terrified I'll make the wrong one and lose everything again." "I know. And you're still here. Where else would I be?" He reached out then, slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal, and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm, real. "If this goes badly," he said, "if Ashford wins, you'll lose everything too. The title, the security, all of it. Then we'd better make sure he doesn't win." They reached Bristol the next afternoon. The solicitor's office was in a narrow building tucked between a bank and a bookshop, the kind of place that looked like it had been there for centuries. Mr. Pemberton was ancient, possibly older than the building itself, with wispy white hair and spectacles so thick they made his eyes look enormous. "Lord Blackthorne," he wheezed when they were shown in, "I wondered if you'd ever come." "You have documents from my father's case?" "I have everything, every scrap of paper, every transaction record, every piece of correspondence." He gestured to a wall of filing cabinets that looked ready to collapse under their own weight. "I kept it all, despite instructions to destroy it." "Why?" "Because I never believed your father acted alone, and I thought someday someone might want the truth." Elara felt hope surge in her chest. "Can we see them?" Pemberton looked at her properly for the first time. "And who might you be?" "The Duchess of Blackthorne." His eyebrows rose. My, times have changed. He shuffled to the cabinets, pulled out a key that hung on a chain around his neck. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Evidence of a partner," Adrian said. "Someone who worked with my father to embezzle the funds." "Ah, yes. That would be in the unmarked ledger." "There's an unmarked ledger?" "Of course. Your father wasn't completely foolish. He kept 2 sets of books, one for the authorities, one for himself. I found the second set after he died, hidden in his study." Pemberton opened a drawer, rifled through papers that looked ready to crumble into dust. "Here." He handed Adrian a leather-bound book, small and unremarkable. Adrian opened it with shaking hands. Elara moved to his side, reading over his shoulder. The entries were in code, numbers and initials, nothing concrete. But as they worked through the pages, a pattern emerged. Money flowing in and out, always in specific amounts, always marked with the same 2 initials, CA. "CA," Elara breathed. Cornelius Ashford. Not just the son, Adrian said, his voice tight. The father. Cornelius Sr. wasn't just an investor. He was the partner. The revelation hit them both like thunder. He helped my father embezzle the money, Adrian continued, flipping pages frantically. He was supposed to get half, but my father double-crossed him, kept most of it, left Ashford Sr. with nothing. That's why he drank himself to death. Not grief. Rage. And his son has been trying to get it back ever since, Elara finished. Not as justice, as revenge for his father being cheated. Pemberton nodded slowly. I suspected as much, but I could never prove it. This ledger proves it. Adrian clutched the book like it was sacred. This shows Ashford Sr. was complicit, which means his son has no legal claim to anything. It also means, Elara said carefully, that if we expose this, we expose what your father did. Fully. Publicly. Adrian's face went pale. The scandal would be enormous. Yes. It would destroy what's left of the family name. Probably. He looked at the ledger in his hands, then at her. What would you do? The question surprised her. What? If this was your choice, what would you do? She thought about it, really thought about it. I'd tell the truth. Because the alternative, living in fear, always looking over your shoulder, always waiting for someone to expose you, that's not living, that's just surviving. And if it costs everything, then at least you'll face it honestly. Adrian closed his eyes, and she saw him making the calculation. 18 years of careful rebuilding versus 1 moment of brutal honesty. Safety versus truth. When he opened his eyes, his decision was clear. We tell the truth, he said. All of it. They returned to Blackthorne Manor with the ledger, ready to face whatever came next. But when they arrived, they found the estate in chaos. Ashford was there, not just him. He'd brought magistrates, constables, a small army of official-looking men with papers and seals and authority. What's happening? Elara demanded as Morrison rushed to meet them. Mr. Ashford filed a legal claim this morning, Your Grace. He's demanding immediate possession of the estate pending investigation of the Duke's debts. Adrian's face went hard as stone. On what grounds? He says you've been evading rightful payment for 18 years. He's convinced the magistrate to issue a writ of seizure. They found Ashford in the main hall, surrounded by men taking inventory of furniture and paintings and anything of value. He was in his 40s, tall and thin with his father's eyes, cold, calculating, merciless. Blackthorne, he said when he saw Adrian. How convenient. I was just cataloging your assets. You have no right. I have every right. My father was robbed. You've refused to make amends. The law is on my side. Your father was a thief, Adrian's voice cut through the noise, just like mine. Ashford went very still. What did you say? I have proof. Documentation showing your father wasn't just an investor. He was my father's partner in the embezzlement scheme, which means you have no legal claim to anything because your inheritance was built on stolen money. That's a lie. It's the truth, and I have the ledger to prove it. Adrian held up the leather book, and Elara saw fear flash across Ashford's face. Real fear. That could be forged, fabricated. It's in my father's handwriting, verified by his solicitor. Every transaction, every payment, every piece of your father's involvement is documented. You're bluffing. Am I? Adrian stepped forward. Because I'm prepared to show this to every magistrate in the region, to expose exactly what both our fathers did. My family's name will be destroyed, but so will yours, and your legal claim dies with it. The room had gone completely silent. Even the men taking inventory had stopped to watch. Ashford's face twisted with rage. You'd destroy yourself just to stop me? Without hesitation. You're insane. I'm done living in fear of men like you. Elara felt her heart hammering. This was it. The moment where Adrian chose truth over safety, honesty over survival, where he burned down everything to be free. Ashford stared at him, clearly trying to calculate his next move. Then his expression changed, shifted into something cruel and desperate. Fine, he said. You want to play it that way? Let's play. He turned to the magistrate. I'm filing additional charges. Arson. The fire in the East Wing. Lord Blackthorne set it himself to destroy evidence of his debts. That's absurd, Elara said, stepping forward. We both nearly died in that fire. Convenient cover, isn't it? A failed attempt that makes him look like a victim instead of a criminal. You set that fire. Adrian's control was slipping. You're the one who wanted those documents destroyed. Prove it. And there it was. The trap. Ashford had covered his tracks too well. Without evidence, it was his word against Adrian's. The magistrate looked uncomfortable. Lord Blackthorne, these are serious accusations on both sides. I'm going to need to investigate further before making any decisions. In the meantime, Ashford said smoothly, I insist the estate remain under supervision to prevent any further incidents. Agreed, the magistrate said. Lord Blackthorne, you and your household will remain here, but you're not to conduct any business or make any transactions until this is resolved. Is that understood? Adrian looked like he wanted to argue. Elara grabbed his hand, a silent reminder that losing his temper now would only make things worse. Understood, he said through clenched teeth. The magistrate nodded. We'll reconvene in 3 days. Bring any evidence you wish to present. As they left, Ashford moved close to Adrian, his voice dropping to a whisper only they could hear. 3 days, Blackthorne. That's all you have. And when this is over, I'm going to take everything you've built and burn it to the ground, just like you burned my father's legacy. He walked away, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their home, surrounded by strangers cataloging their possessions, with only 3 days to prove their innocence and save everything they'd fought for. Elara turned to Adrian, saw the fear and fury warring in his expression. We'll figure this out, she said. How? He's right. We can't prove he set the fire. Then we find another way. There is no other way. There's always another way. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. We didn't come this far to give up now. We have the ledger. We have the truth. We'll find a way to make it count. Elara, trust me. Please. Just trust me. And in his eyes, she saw him do it. Saw him choose, for maybe the first time in his life, to believe in someone other than himself. Okay, he whispered. Okay. But as they stood there, surrounded by enemies and running out of time, Elara wondered if trust would be enough to save them from the fire closing in on all sides. They had 3 days. 72 hours to find proof that Cornelius Ashford had set the fire, or watch everything Adrian had rebuilt crumble into ash. Elara spent the first night pacing her sitting room while Adrian buried himself in his study, going through every paper, every record, every scrap of correspondence they had. By dawn, they were no closer to answers. There has to be something, she said, bringing him coffee as gray light filtered through the windows. Some evidence he left behind. Ashford's not stupid. He covered his tracks. Adrian looked like he hadn't slept, probably because he hadn't. The lantern could have been placed by anyone. We have no witnesses, no proof it was him specifically. What about his visit 3 days before the fire? Someone must have seen something. Morrison showed him to my study. They spoke for less than 10 minutes. That's it. Elara set down the coffee and leaned against the desk. What did you talk about? The same thing we always talk about. Money, demands, threats. Did he threaten you specifically? Say anything that could be construed as intent to harm? He said I'd regret refusing him. Not exactly a confession. She chewed her lip, thinking. There had to be something they were missing, some detail that would crack this open. The staff, she said suddenly. Not just Morrison. Everyone who was working that day. Someone might have seen something. Ashford arriving early, leaving late, going somewhere he shouldn't have been. Elara, we've questioned everyone. We've asked the senior staff. But what about the kitchen workers, the stable hands, the gardeners? What about people who weren't supposed to be watching but might have noticed anyway? Adrian straightened slightly, hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. It's worth trying. They spent the morning interviewing every person who'd been on the estate 3 days before the fire. Most had nothing useful. They'd been too focused on their own work to notice a visitor. But then they talked to Sarah, one of the kitchen maids, a girl barely 16 who looked terrified to be in the Duke's presence. "I seen him," she whispered when Elara asked about Ashford. "The tall man in the dark coat. Where did you see him?" "Near the east wing. I was bringing herbs from the garden, and I saw him walking that way. Thought it was odd because Mr. Morrison had just shown him out the front entrance." Elara's pulse quickened. "You're certain?" "Yes, Your Grace. I remember because he looked angry, like he was muttering to himself." "Did he go into the east wing?" "I don't know. I didn't want to get caught staring, so I went back to the kitchen. It wasn't proof, but it was something. Evidence that Ashford had been near the sealed wing, that he'd gone there deliberately despite being escorted out." "Would you be willing to testify to this?" Adrian asked, in front of the magistrate. Sarah's eyes went wide with fear. Your Grace, I'm just a maid. Who'd believe me?" "I would," Elara said firmly. "And your testimony matters. You saw something important." "But Mr. Ashford, he's a powerful man. What if he can't hurt you? I won't let him." The girl looked between them, clearly terrified, but also something else. Determined, maybe, or just exhausted from carrying the weight of what she knew. "All right," she said finally. "I'll tell what I saw." It was a start, but they needed more. Elara found it in the most unexpected place. She was going through the remains of the East Wing, the parts that hadn't completely burned, looking for anything salvageable, when she noticed something odd. The lock on the sealed library door was damaged, but not from fire. It had been forced open, the mechanism bent and twisted like someone had used a tool to break it. "Adrian," she called, "come look at this." He joined her, examining the lock. "Someone broke in. Before the fire. This kind of damage doesn't come from heat. It's physical force. Ashford broke in to set the fire." "More than that." She pointed to scratches around the lock. "Look at these marks. Someone tried to pick it first, failed, then forced it. That takes time and effort. This wasn't a quick job." Adrian's expression shifted from exhaustion to something harder. "If we can prove the lock was forced before the fire started, we can establish that someone broke in deliberately. Combined with Sarah's testimony that she saw Ashford near this wing, it's still circumstantial, but it's better than nothing." They documented everything, sketched the lock damage, noted the marks, gathered what evidence they could. Then Adrian did something Elara didn't expect. He called for Webb. "I need you to go into town," he told the steward. "Find a locksmith, someone reputable who can examine this lock and provide expert testimony about how it was damaged." "Yes, Your Grace, right away." As Webb left, Elara touched Adrian's arm. "You're trusting people. I'm trusting you, and you trust them, so—" He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the admission. "I'm trying." It was such a small thing, such a tiny crack in the walls he'd built, but it felt monumental. The locksmith arrived that afternoon, a wizened man named Mr. Fletcher, who examined the damaged lock with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient texts. "Definitely forced," he confirmed. "Someone used a pry bar or similar tool. Took them a while too, based on the repeated marks. I'd say at least 15-20 minutes of work." "Could you testify to that?" Adrian asked. "In front of a magistrate? Certainly. I've done it before in theft cases. This is similar." Another piece. Another small, crucial piece. But Ashford had resources too, and he wasn't sitting idle. On the second day, word reached them that he'd filed additional complaints, claims that Adrian had been bribing witnesses, that the ledger was a forgery, that everything they were doing was an elaborate scheme to avoid rightful debt payment. "He's poisoning the well," Adrian said, reading the official notice, "making sure that even if we present evidence, the magistrate will doubt it. Then we need something he can't dispute." Elara paced the study, mind racing. "Something that proves beyond doubt that he's lying." "Like what? A signed confession?" She stopped mid-stride. "What did you say?" "I said, a confession." "Adrian, what if we could get him to confess?" "He's not going to just admit to arson." "Not openly. But what if we could trick him into it, get him to reveal something only the person who set the fire would know?" Adrian stared at her. "You want to set a trap?" "Why not? He's done it to us enough times." "It's dangerous. If it goes wrong, then we're no worse off than we are now." She moved closer, energy thrumming through her. Adrian, we have 1 day left. 1. We can spend it being careful and lose everything, or we can take a risk and maybe, just maybe, win. She could see him fighting it, every instinct screaming at him to play it safe, to trust only what he could control. But she could also see something else emerging, a willingness to gamble, to believe that sometimes the only way through was forward. What did you have in mind? He asked. The plan was simple, which meant it was probably stupid, but they were out of better options. Elara sent word to Ashford requesting a private meeting. Not Adrian, her specifically. She claimed to want to negotiate a settlement, to find a peaceful solution before the magistrate's hearing the next day. Ashford agreed immediately, probably sensing weakness. They met in the main drawing room, the same room where Elara had first agreed to marry Adrian. It felt like a lifetime ago. Ashford arrived precisely on time, that same cold smile on his face. Your Grace, how unexpected. Mr. Ashford, thank you for coming. When a duchess requests a meeting, one doesn't refuse. He settled into a chair like he owned it. Though I am curious what you think you can offer me that your husband hasn't already refused. Reason, she said, and perhaps a way for both of you to walk away with some dignity intact. I'm listening. My husband has proof that your father was involved in the embezzlement. You know this, but he's also prepared to expose that proof publicly, which will destroy both families' reputations. So he said, what if there was another way? What if he agreed to pay a settlement, not the full amount you're demanding, but something substantial, in exchange for your agreement to keep the ledger private? Ashford leaned back, studying her. How substantial? 30,000 pounds. It was an enormous sum, more than they could really afford, but it had to be big enough to tempt him. That's barely half what I'm owed. It's half of what you claim you're owed. In reality, your father helped steal that money. You're entitled to nothing, but my husband is willing to be generous in exchange for peace. Generous? Ashford laughed. That's one word for it. It's a fair offer. Fair would be getting everything, the estate, the businesses, all of it, like my father should have gotten. Your father was a thief who got caught. Ashford's expression hardened. My father was a brilliant man who got double-crossed by an even bigger thief. Then why not take the settlement and move on? Why this vendetta? Because some debts can't be paid with money. He leaned forward, voice dropping. Your husband's father destroyed mine. Not just financially, he broke him. Turned him into a drunk who died in his own vomit because he couldn't live with the shame. So yes, I want the money. But more than that, I want Adrian Blackthorne to know what it feels like to lose everything. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. Hidden in the panel behind the bookshelf, Adrian was listening. They'd installed a small opening weeks ago when they'd had the woodwork repaired. Every word Ashford said was being heard, but they needed more. Needed him to actually confess. Is that why you set the fire? Elara asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Ashford went very still. What? The East Wing. You said it, didn't you, to destroy the evidence before we could use it. That's a serious accusation. It's a logical conclusion. You visited 3 days before the fire. You knew what was in that wing because you'd been demanding those documents for months. When my husband refused to hand them over, you decided to destroy them yourself. You can't prove that. Can I? We have a witness who saw you near the East Wing after you were supposed to have left. We have evidence the lock was forced. We have the timeline matching perfectly. Ashford stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Why? Because I'm getting too close to the truth? Because you're making wild accusations with no proof. Then deny it. Look me in the eye and tell me you didn't set that fire. He stared at her, jaw working. She could see him calculating, trying to figure out if this was a trap or just desperate flailing. Your husband is a fool, he said instead. He could have given me what I wanted months ago and avoided all of this. But he's too proud, too stubborn. So yes, I took matters into my own hands. Her heart stopped. You're admitting it. I'm admitting nothing that will hold up in court. There's no proof I set that fire. Your witness saw me walking near a wing of the house. So what? The lock was forced. Could have been anyone. All you have is circumstantial nonsense that won't convince any magistrate worth the title. Maybe, but you just confirmed you took matters into your own hands. That's pretty damning. It's a figure of speech. Is it? She stood, moving closer. Because it sounds like a confession to me. You came here, you broke into the sealed wing, and you set fire to evidence that would have proven your father's guilt. That's arson. That's destruction of property. That's criminal. Ashford's face went red. You're twisting my words. I'm repeating them, and I'll repeat them again tomorrow in front of the magistrate. It'll be your word against mine. And who's going to believe a desperate duchess trying to save her husband's reputation? The locksmith who examined the damage, the maid who saw you, the timeline that proves you had means and opportunity. She crossed her arms. You made a mistake coming here, Mr. Ashford. You thought you could intimidate me into a settlement. Instead, you just gave us exactly what we needed. Understanding dawned on his face. The trap, the setup, all of it. You... He grabbed her arm hard enough to hurt. You scheming little... The panel behind the bookshelf flew open, and Adrian emerged, face thunderous. Let go of my wife. Ashford released her immediately, stumbling back. This is entrapment. Whatever you think you heard, I heard you admit to setting the fire. I heard you confess to coming here to destroy evidence. Adrian moved to stand beside Elara, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked dangerous. Not cold, hot with protective fury. And I have witnesses who will testify to everything you just said. Witnesses? There's no one else. Morrison stepped through the door, followed by Webb and Mr. Fletcher, the locksmith. All of them had been listening from the hallway. We heard everything, sir, Morrison said, his usually neutral face showing something that might have been satisfaction. Every word. Ashford looked between them, trapped and knowing it. This won't hold up. You can't use a private conversation. Actually, Webb said, we can. You weren't coerced. You came here voluntarily, and you confessed to multiple crimes in the presence of multiple witnesses. That's admissible. You have no right. We have every right. Adrian cut him off. You burned down part of my house. You tried to destroy evidence. You've spent months making my life hell over a debt I don't even owe, because your father was as much a criminal as mine. I'd say we have plenty of rights. Ashford's composure finally cracked. You think this is over? You think one conversation changes anything? I still have the magistrate who will hear testimony from 4 witnesses about your confession, along with evidence of forced entry, expert analysis of the lock damage, and documentation of your threats. Adrian's voice was ice and steel. You're done, Ashford. It's over. For a moment, Elara thought Ashford might actually try to fight. His hands clenched into fists, his face twisted with rage and desperation. Then he seemed to deflate. My father deserved better. Maybe he did, Adrian said, surprising everyone. But he made his choices, just like mine did. And we don't get to destroy other people's lives because we're angry about our father's mistakes. Easy for you to say. You still have everything. I have what I earned, nothing more. Ashford looked at him with pure hatred. Then he turned and walked out without another word. The silence he left behind was profound. Is it really over? Elara asked quietly. The magistrate will still need to hear evidence, Webb said. But with this testimony, along with everything else we've gathered, yes, I believe it is. Adrian turned to the men who'd witnessed everything. Thank you, all of you. I know I haven't always been... He struggled with the words. I haven't always been easy to work for, but you stood with me anyway. That means more than you know. Morrison actually smiled. A small, brief thing, but genuine. You're learning, Your Grace. That's what matters. After they left, Elara and Adrian stood in the drawing room, the weight of everything that had just happened settling over them. That was insane, Adrian said. That was necessary. You could have been hurt. If he'd gotten violent, but he didn't. And we won. She grabbed his hands. We actually won. He pulled her close, and for the first time since they'd married, it felt natural. Not a transaction or an arrangement, but 2 people who'd fought through hell together and come out the other side. I couldn't have done this without you, he said against her hair. I know. He laughed, an actual genuine laugh that sounded rusty from disuse but real. Modest as ever. Someone has to balance out your self-loathing. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the wreckage of what had been and the possibility of what might be. The magistrate's hearing the next day was almost anticlimactic. Sarah testified about seeing Ashford near the east wing. Mr. Fletcher presented his analysis of the forced lock. Morrison, Webb, and Fletcher recounted Ashford's confession in damning detail. Ashford's solicitor tried to argue entrapment, tried to claim the witnesses were biased, tried everything he could think of to discredit the evidence. It didn't work. The magistrate ruled in Adrian's favor on all counts. The charges of debt evasion were dismissed based on the ledger proving Cornelia Sr.'s complicity. Ashford was ordered to pay damages for the fire and forbidden from making any further claims against the Blackthorne estate. When the gavel came down, Elara felt Adrian's hand find hers under the table. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The gesture said enough. They won. But the real victory came afterward, when they returned to the manor and Adrian did something unprecedented. He called a meeting of all the estate workers. They gathered in the main hall, tenant farmers, household staff, stable hands, field workers, everyone who kept the estate running. Most of them looked nervous, probably expecting bad news. Adrian stood at the front, and Elara could see him struggling with what to say. He'd spent 18 years keeping these people at a distance, treating them like cogs in a machine. Admitting he'd been wrong didn't come naturally. "I owe you all an apology," he started, and the shock that rippled through the crowd was almost audible. "I've run this estate like a fortress, kept everyone at arm's length, refused to invest in improvements or show trust. I told myself it was necessary, that it was the only way to survive." He paused, and Elara saw him look at her, drawing strength maybe, or just remembering why this mattered. "But I was wrong. My fear, my need to control everything, it hurt people. It created a place where you worked but didn't thrive, where you were paid but not valued." He straightened his shoulders. "That changes now. The Duchess has shown me that investing in people isn't weakness, it's strength, and I intend to prove I can learn that lesson." Someone in the back started clapping, then someone else. Within seconds, the whole hall was applauding, not politely, but genuinely, with relief and hope, and maybe even a little disbelief. Adrian looked overwhelmed by the response. He held up a hand for quiet. "The tenant cottages are being repaired. The school the Duchess proposed for your children will be built by spring. Wages will be reviewed and adjusted fairly. And if any of you have concerns or ideas about how we can improve things, my door, our door, is open." More applause. Elara felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she'd wanted from the beginning. Not warmth exactly, not grand declarations of love. Just this. Adrian choosing to be human, to trust, to believe that people could be good if you gave them the chance. After the meeting, as workers filed out with smiles and excited chatter, Webb approached them. "Well done, Your Grace," he said to Adrian, "both of you." "We'll see if I can actually follow through," Adrian said, but there was less cynicism in his voice than usual. "You will. You're stubborn enough." Webb grinned. "Besides, the Duchess won't let you backslide." "Damn right I won't," Elara agreed. As Webb left, Adrian turned to her. "I need to show you something." He led her through the manor to the east wing, or what remained of it. The structural damage was being assessed for repairs, but the burned shell of the sealed library still stood. "I never told you what was really in here," he said, stopping at the threshold, "beyond the documents and the ledger." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He took a breath. "My mother's things. Letters she wrote to my father, journals she kept, paintings she'd made. I sealed them away after she died because I couldn't stand to look at them. They reminded me too much of everything we'd lost, everything he'd destroyed." Elara's throat tightened. "Adrian, most of it's gone now, burned. But I realized something when we were fighting for this place, fighting to clear our names." He met her eyes. "I was so focused on protecting the past that I forgot to build a future. I thought if I could just hold on to everything, control it, preserve it, never let anyone close enough to hurt me, I'd be safe. But you were just alone." "Yeah." He smiled, sad but genuine. "I was just alone." He pulled something from his coat. A small painting, singed at the edges but intact. It showed a woman with kind eyes and dark hair standing in a garden. "My mother," he said. "I managed to save this. Webb pulled it from the rubble. She's beautiful. She would have liked you. She always said I needed someone who wouldn't put up with my nonsense." He looked at the painting, then at Elara. "I think she'd be glad I found you." Elara took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I think she'd be proud of who you're becoming." They stood there in the ruins of the past, holding pieces of what had been lost, and for the first time it felt like they were truly building something new. Not the cold transaction they'd started with, not the careful distance they'd maintained. Something real, something worth fighting for. Adrian carefully wrapped the painting and tucked it back in his coat. "We should start planning the repairs. The east wing could be beautiful again if we do it right. We could add windows, let in more light, and maybe we could display some of my mother's remaining things, make it a space that honors her instead of hiding her." Elara nodded, surprised and pleased by the suggestion. "I think that's perfect." As they walked back through the manor, staff greeted them with real smiles instead of wary nods. The change was subtle but undeniable. The whole place felt different, warmer, more alive. In his study that evening, Adrian pulled out the ledger one final time. "What do we do with this?" he asked. "It proves my father's crimes, and Ashford's father's. Do we destroy it? Keep it?" "We keep it," Elara said firmly. "Not hidden away, but as a reminder. Your father made terrible choices, but you spent 18 years making better ones. That matters." "Does it? When the foundation was built on lies?" "The foundation doesn't matter as much as what you build on top of it. And you've built something good here, Adrian, something honest. Don't forget that." He set the ledger aside and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious that might slip away if he let go. "I love you," he said quietly. "I don't think I knew how to before, but I do now." She pulled back to look at him, saw the vulnerability in his face, the fear that she might not feel the same, that he'd waited too long to say it. "I love you too," she said, "even when you're being impossible. Especially when I'm being impossible. That too." He kissed her then, and it wasn't like the perfunctory press of lips at their wedding. It was real and warm and full of everything they'd survived together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." "Always," she said. "That's what partnership means." And in that moment, in the study where they'd fought and argued and slowly learned to trust each other, the frost that had lived in Adrian's heart for 18 years finally began to thaw. Outside, the first real snow of winter was falling, soft and clean and new. Inside, two people who'd started as strangers were becoming something neither of them had expected. A family. Spring came to Blackthorne Manor like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing earth that had been dormant for months. The repairs to the east wing were nearly complete. New glass in the windows, fresh paint on the walls, and in the center of what had been the sealed library, a small gallery dedicated to Adrian's mother. Her paintings hung on the walls, her journals were carefully displayed in glass cases, and the room that had once held only secrets now held light. Elara stood in the doorway one morning, watching workers install the final window pane, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the quiet satisfaction of seeing something broken made whole again. "You've been standing there for 20 minutes." She turned to find Adrian behind her, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one, and she took it gratefully. "I was just thinking," she said. 6 months ago, this place felt like a tomb. Now it feels like a home." "That's your doing. It's our doing." He smiled. Something he did more often now, though it still carried a hint of surprise, like he was getting used to the sensation. "Fair enough." They stood together, sipping tea and watching the workers finish. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. They'd learned each other's rhythms over the winter, when to push, when to give space, when to simply exist side by side without needing words. "I have something to show you," Adrian said after a moment. "If you're not too busy revolutionizing the household. I think Mrs. Hendricks can manage without me for an hour." He led her outside, past the greenhouse where her plants were thriving, past the newly repaired tenant cottages, all the way to the edge of the estate where the forest began. There, in a clearing she'd never noticed before, construction was underway. "What is this?" she asked. "Your school, for the tenant children." She stared at the half-built structure. Already she could see it would be beautiful. Large windows for light, a proper roof, enough space for dozens of students. "Adrian, this is too much. I just wanted a small room. Maybe you wanted to give children a chance at education. I'm making sure you can do it properly." He looked almost embarrassed. "Besides, I had the money from the cottages project left over, and Webb suggested that if we're going to do something, we should do it right." Webb suggested it? He's been full of suggestions lately. Apparently working for someone who actually listens makes people chatty. Elara laughed, looping her arm through his. "You've changed." "I've had a good teacher." They watched the builders work for a while, and Elara felt something bloom in her chest. Not just happiness, but purpose. This was what she'd wanted from the beginning. Not romance or grand gestures, but the ability to make real change, to help people who needed it. "When will it be finished?" she asked. "Another month? Maybe 2? We'll need to hire a teacher, get books and supplies. I'll handle it. I've already been corresponding with some educators in Bristol. There's a woman, Miss Catherine Mills, who's interested in the position." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "You've been planning this." "I've been hopeful." "There's a difference?" "With you, there always was." She squeezed his arm, "But not anymore." They walked back toward the manor, and as they crested the hill, Elara saw a carriage approaching, expensive by the look of it, with a crest she didn't recognize on the door. "Are we expecting visitors?" she asked. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. "Not that I know of." The carriage pulled up to the main entrance, and a footman opened the door. Out stepped a man in his 60s, well-dressed and carrying himself with the kind of authority that came from old money and older titles. Morrison appeared to greet him, then hurried over to where Adrian and Elara stood. "Your Grace, it's Lord Pemberton. He says it's urgent." The name sparked recognition. That was the solicitor they'd visited in Bristol, the one who'd given them the ledger. "Show him to my study," Adrian said. "We'll be right there." Lord Pemberton was examining the books on Adrian's shelves when they entered, his weathered hands running over spines with the care of someone who loved the written word. "Lord Blackthorne, Duchess." He bowed slightly. "Thank you for seeing me without notice." "Of course," Adrian said, though his tone was wary. "Is something wrong?" "Wrong? No, quite the opposite, in fact." Pemberton settled into a chair with a sigh of old bones. "I've come with news. Good news, I think, though it may come as a shock." Elara exchanged a glance with Adrian. After everything they'd been through, the word shock didn't inspire confidence. "Go on," Adrian said. "I've been doing some additional research since your visit, going through old records, tracking down loose ends." Pemberton pulled out a folder thick with papers. "You remember the ledger showed your father had a partner, Cornelius Ashford Sr.? "Yes, that's how we proved Ashford Jr.'s claims were invalid." "Indeed. But what the ledger didn't show was where the money went after the embezzlement was discovered. Your father returned some of it, yes. He paid back several investors before his death. But the bulk of it, nearly £60,000, simply vanished. We assumed he spent it, or hid it. That's what I assumed too, until I found this." Pemberton laid out a series of bank documents, all yellowed with age. "Your father didn't spend the money. He deposited it into a trust specifically designed to pay back the remaining investors over time, with interest." Adrian went very still. "What?" "The trust was set up 3 months before his death. He'd arranged for automatic payments to be made annually to a list of creditors. But the trust was never activated because—" Pemberton hesitated. "Because he died before finalizing the paperwork. The bank held the funds in escrow, waiting for instructions that never came." "For 18 years?" Elara asked, incredulous. "The bank made attempts to contact the estate, But your father's death created legal complications. Eventually, the matter was filed away and forgotten, until I started asking questions. Adrian looked like he'd been struck. You're saying there's £60,000 just sitting in a bank somewhere? 60,000 plus 18 years of compound interest. I estimate the total is now closer to 90,000. The number hung in the air like something impossible. My father was trying to make it right, Adrian said quietly. Before he died, he was trying to pay everyone back. It appears so. And according to the trust documents, the funds belong to you as his heir. You can claim them and use them as you see fit. Elara watched Adrian process this, saw the emotions flicker across his face, shock, grief, something that might have been relief. Who was supposed to receive payments, he asked. Pemberton consulted his papers. 14 investors in total. Most are deceased now, but their heirs are still living. I have addresses for all of them. Then we pay them, exactly as my father intended. All of it? Your Grace, even if you honor the original trust amounts, you'll have substantial funds remaining. We pay them all of it, every penny plus the interest. My father stole from these people. I'm going to make it right. Pemberton smiled, something warm and genuine. I was hoping you'd say that. I've already drafted the necessary paperwork. If you sign, I can begin disbursements immediately. Adrian signed without hesitation. After Pemberton left, promising to handle everything, Adrian stood at the window of his study, staring out at the estate. I spent 18 years convinced my father was just a thief, he said, that he destroyed people out of greed and left me to clean up the mess. But he was trying to fix it, Elara said, coming to stand beside him. He just ran out of time. He was a coward. He should have faced what he'd done instead of taking the easy way out. Maybe, but he also tried to do the right thing in the end. That counts for something. Adrian turned to her, and she saw tears in his eyes, the first time she'd ever seen him cry. I've hated him for so long, built my entire life around being different from him, better than him, and now you know he was human, flawed and scared and trying his best, just like everyone else. I don't know how to feel about that. You don't have to know right now, just let yourself feel it. He pulled her close, and she held him while he cried for the father he'd lost and the man he'd never really known. Outside, life went on, workers building, staff working, the estate thriving. But in this moment, in the quiet of his study, Adrian let himself grieve properly for the first time in 18 years. The payments to the investors' heirs took 2 months to complete. Each one received a letter from Adrian explaining what had happened, along with a sum that was often larger than they'd expected. The responses varied. Some were grateful, some were shocked. A few were angry that it had taken so long, though most of that anger faded when they understood the full story. But one response stood out. It came from Margaret Ashford, Cornelius Jr.'s sister. She'd received her father's portion of the trust, a sum that represented what he'd actually invested, not what he'd helped steal, and her letter was 3 pages of careful, emotional handwriting. Lord Blackthorne, I don't know how to thank you for this. My brother has been consumed by bitterness for so long, convinced that your family owed us everything. But reading your letter, understanding what really happened, that our father was as guilty as yours, has been difficult but necessary. Cornelius refuses to accept it. He's too invested in his anger, but I wanted you to know that I see what you're trying to do. You're breaking the cycle of blame and hurt that's poisoned both our families for too long. I hope someday my brother can see that too. Until then, please know that at least one member of the Ashford family is grateful for your honesty and your integrity. With sincere regards, Margaret Ashford. Adrian read the letter twice, then handed it to Elara. One member of the Ashford family doesn't hate me, he said. I'll take it. It's progress. It's something. They never heard from Cornelius Ashford again. Rumor had it he'd left the region entirely, unable to face the truth about his father or admit he'd been wrong. Adrian didn't pursue it. He'd learned that some people couldn't be saved from their own bitterness, and trying only hurt yourself. The school opened in late spring, with Miss Catherine Mills as its teacher. 23 children enrolled on the first day, sons and daughters of tenant farmers and estate workers, kids who'd never had access to education before. Elara visited on the first morning, watching through the window as Miss Mills taught them their letters. The joy on those small faces, the hunger to learn. It made everything worth it. You did that, Adrian said, standing beside her. We did that. No, this was your vision. I just provided the building. You provided the courage to make it happen. That's more important. Inside, one of the children, James Fletcher's daughter, the one whose mother had been sick, raised her hand with a question. Miss Mills smiled and called on her, and the girl's answer made the whole class laugh. She's going to be trouble, that one, Adrian observed. Good. The world needs more trouble from smart women. He laughed, pulling her close. I'm well aware. Summer brought the formal reopening of the East Wing. They debated whether to make it a public event, eventually deciding that the people who'd stood by them deserved to see what they'd helped save. So they invited the entire household staff, the tenant families, and several of the local gentry who'd supported them during the Ashford ordeal. The gallery was beautiful. Adrian's mother's paintings glowed in the afternoon light. Her journals were displayed with small cards explaining their significance, and in the center of the room stood a portrait, commissioned by Adrian, of the woman herself. She would have been proud of you, Elara whispered as they stood before it. I hope so. I know so. The guests arrived in waves, and Elara watched Adrian transform. Not into the cold, distant duke he'd been when they married, but into something new, a man who greeted people by name, who listened to their stories, who actually smiled when they congratulated him. Webb cornered her at one point, champagne in hand. You've worked a miracle, Your Grace. I just reminded him he was human. That's the miracle. Mrs. Hendricks was more direct. Thank you, she said simply, for not giving up on him, on all of us. I couldn't have given up. This is my home too. And we're grateful for it. As the afternoon wore into evening, Adrian pulled Elara aside to a quiet corner of the gallery. I have something for you, he said, looking almost nervous. You've already given me everything. Not quite. He pulled out a small box, and Elara's heart stuttered. Before you panic, this isn't what you think. Well, it is, but not in the way you think. He opened the box to reveal a ring, not an engagement ring, but something more meaningful. A simple band with an inscription inside. Partnership, always. When we married, he said, I gave you a contract, terms and conditions and nothing more. But we've become something different, something real. And I wanted you to have something that represents what we actually are. Partners. Equals. People who chose each other even when we didn't have to. Elara felt tears spill over. Adrian, you don't have to wear it. I just wanted you to know that I see you. I see everything you are, everything you've done, and I'm grateful every single day. She took the ring, slipped it onto her finger beside the wedding band she'd worn for months. It fit perfectly, of course. He'd probably measured while she slept, the sneaky bastard. I love you, she said, in case I haven't mentioned it enough. You have, but I don't mind hearing it again. I love you. I love your stubborn pride and your terrible coffee-making skills and the way you pretend you don't care about people when you actually care desperately. I make excellent coffee. You make terrible coffee, but I love you anyway. He kissed her there, in front of his mother's portrait, surrounded by the evidence of everything they'd survived and built together. And it felt like a beginning, not an ending. Autumn arrived with a letter that would change everything one final time. It came from the Royal Council of Northern Territories, a formal document with official seals and language so dense it took Adrian 3 tries to decode it. What does it say? Elara asked, watching his expression shift from confusion to shock to something like disbelief. They want to appoint me as regional commissioner. What does that mean? It means oversight of all the estates and holdings in the Northern Territories. It means being responsible for economic development, dispute resolution, infrastructure projects, basically everything that affects thousands of people. That's huge. It's insane. Why would they offer this to me? Elara looked at the letter, reading the key passage. Your successful restoration of the Blackthorne estate, your fair treatment of tenants and workers, and your demonstrated commitment to regional development make you an ideal candidate for this position. Because you've proven you can do it, she said. You took a broken estate and made it thrive. You treated people fairly when you could have exploited them. You chose honesty over self-preservation. That's exactly what they need. I can't do this alone. You won't be alone. You'll have advisors, staff. I'll have you. She met his eyes, saw the question there. Not whether she'd support him, but whether she'd stand beside him in something this massive, this public, this terrifying. Always, she said. That's what the ring means, remember? He pulled her into his arms, holding tight. This is going to change everything. Everything already changed. We're just making it official. Adrian accepted the position 3 days later. The formal ceremony took place in the capital, a grand affair with nobility from across the territories, officials in ceremonial dress, and enough pomp and circumstance to make Elara's head spin. But what she remembered most wasn't the ceremony itself. It was the moment afterward, when Adrian gave his first address as regional commissioner. He stood before hundreds of people, lords and ladies, merchants and magistrates, workers and farmers, and spoke not from a prepared text but from his heart. I come to this position with no illusions about my past, he began. My father was a criminal who hurt people. I spent 18 years trying to atone for his mistakes while making plenty of my own. I built walls, pushed people away, and convinced myself that control was the same as strength. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. But I learned something over this past year. I learned that real strength isn't about control. It's about trust. It's about investing in people, believing in them, giving them the tools and opportunities to succeed. It's about admitting when you're wrong and doing the hard work to make things right. He looked directly at Elara, standing in the front row. I learned that from my wife. She saw past the walls I'd built and demanded better, not just for me, but for everyone who depended on this estate. She refused to accept that things had to stay broken just because they'd been broken for a long time. Elara felt her throat tighten. As your commissioner, I promise to approach this role with that same philosophy. I'll listen to your concerns. I'll invest in your communities. I'll make decisions based not on fear or tradition, but on what's right and what's possible. And when I make mistakes, because I will, I'll own them and work to fix them. He paused, letting that sink in. We can build something better here. Not perfect. Nothing human is ever perfect. But better. Fairer. More just. If you're willing to work for it, so am I. The applause that followed was thunderous. Afterward, as they made their way through crowds of well-wishers, Elara grabbed Adrian's hand. That was quite a speech. I meant every word. I know you did. That's what made it powerful. They were intercepted by a young man in simple clothes, clearly nervous about approaching someone so important. Your Grace, he stammered. I just wanted to say, my father was one of the investors, the one who received payment last month from the trust. Adrian went still. Which one? Thomas Hartley. He invested everything with your father and lost it all. He died 5 years ago, still bitter about it. But when we got that payment, when we read your letter explaining everything, the young man's voice cracked. It gave my mother closure. She could finally stop hating, stop blaming. She said to tell you thank you. Adrian looked like he might break. I'm the one who should thank her for accepting what I offered, even when it came too late. It wasn't too late. It was exactly when we needed it. After the young man left, Adrian stood silent for a long moment. You okay? Elara asked quietly. Yeah, I spent so long thinking nothing I did would matter, that I could never make up for what my father destroyed. But you did. You are. We are. Yes, we are. They returned to Blackthorne Manor a week later, exhausted and overwhelmed, but also energized. The regional commissioner position would require travel, long hours, difficult decisions. But they'd face it together. The staff welcomed them home with genuine warmth. Mrs. Hendricks had organized a small celebration. Nothing fancy, just good food and better company. The household gathered in the main hall and Morrison proposed a toast. To the Duke and Duchess, he said, raising his glass, who taught us all that change is possible, even when it seems impossible. They drank, they ate, they laughed. And Elara looked around at these people, her people now, and felt something she'd never expected to feel in this cold, imposing manner. She felt home. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, She found Adrian in the East Wing gallery. He stood before his mother's portrait, just looking. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Too much in my head." She joined him, taking his hand. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. The past year, the position, what comes next." He turned to her. "I keep waiting for it all to fall apart, for something to go wrong. Things will go wrong. That's life, but we'll handle it." "You're very confident." "I'm very stubborn. There's a difference." He smiled, pulling her close. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You made a calculated marriage arrangement to save your reputation. Best decision I ever made. Second best. The best was trusting me." "Fair point." They stood together in the quiet gallery, surrounded by the past that had shaped them and the future they were building together. Outside, the estate slept. Tenant cottages with repaired roofs, a school full of eager students, fields that would yield good harvests, people who felt valued and heard. "Do you think we'll be good at this?" Adrian asked. "The commissioner role, I mean." "Probably not at first. We'll make mistakes, piss people off, face opposition." "That's not reassuring." "But we'll learn, we'll adapt, and we'll do it together." She looked up at him. "That's all we can promise. To keep trying, keep growing, keep choosing each other." "I can do that?" "I know you can. You've already proven it." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And in that kiss was everything they'd survived: the cold beginning, the fire and fear, the truth and trust, the love that had grown from nothing into something unshakable. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For seeing something worth saving, for not giving up, for loving me even when I didn't know how to love you back." "Always," she said, echoing the inscription on the ring he'd given her. "Partnership, always. Always." They left the gallery hand in hand, walking through the manor that had once felt like a fortress, but now felt like a home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The commissioner role would demand things from them, test them in ways they couldn't predict. But tonight, they were just two people who'd found each other in the coldest of circumstances and forged something warm and real and lasting. Outside, the first stars appeared in the autumn sky. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth. And in the heart of Blackthorne Manor, where ice had once reigned supreme, love had finally learned to thrive. 5 years later, Elara stood in the same gallery, but everything was different. The portrait of Adrian's mother now had company. New paintings added over time, including one of Elara herself that Adrian had commissioned over her protests. Below it hung a smaller portrait of a little girl with dark curls and her father's serious eyes. Catherine Blackthorne. 3 years old, currently terrorizing the household staff with questions and boundless energy. "Mama!" The little voice echoed through the hallway. "Mama, where are you?" "In the gallery, darling." Catherine burst through the door, followed by a harried-looking governess. "I'm sorry, Your Grace. She wanted to show you something." "It's fine, Miss Peters." "Catherine, what did you want to show me?" The little girl held up a drawing, crude but enthusiastic, showing what appeared to be a house and several stick figures. "It's us. That's Papa, and that's you, and that's me, and that's the baby." Elara felt her hand drift to her swollen belly, 6 months along now, with a son who kicked like he was already impatient to meet the world. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." "Can we hang it with Grandmama's paintings?" Elara's throat tightened. Catherine had never met her grandmother, but Adrian told her stories, carefully curated ones that emphasized the good while acknowledging the complicated truth. "I think that's a wonderful idea." As Miss Peters took Catherine to find the right spot on the wall, Adrian appeared in the doorway. He looked older now, lines at the corners of his eyes, gray starting to thread through his dark hair. But happier. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way that still sometimes caught Elara off guard. "There you are. The delegation from the Eastern Territories arrived early. They're asking for you." "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." "Already did." He came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "You okay?" "Just thinking about how much has changed." "Getting sentimental in your old age?" "I'm 30, Adrian. That's hardly old." "You're right. I'm the old one." She elbowed him gently. "You're 37. Stop fishing for compliments." He grinned, then his expression softened as he looked at their daughter's drawing now hanging on the wall. She wants to be just like you, you know. She wants to be just like both of us, which means she'll probably be twice as stubborn. Heaven help us. They stood there for a moment, watching Catherine and Miss Peters debate the exact right placement for the artwork. This was their legacy now, not just the estate or the commissioner position or the changes they'd made. But this, family, love, the willingness to be imperfect and human and keep trying anyway. We should go, Elara said finally. The delegation is waiting. Let them wait another minute. He pulled her close, one hand on her belly, where their son was already making his presence known with enthusiastic kicks. I love you, he said, like he said every day now, like he was making up for all the time he'd spent silent. I love you too. Even when I'm being impossible? Especially then. They walked out together toward whatever challenges the day would bring. Because that's what partners did. They faced things together. They built things together. They loved each other through the impossible and the mundane and everything in between. And in the manor that had once been as cold as ice, warmth had finally found a permanent home.